The day my brother told me I was too weak was the day I finally understood how power really works. I grew up believing family was unbreakable. That blood meant loyalty, that the business my father built with his bare hands, and my mother protected with sleepless nights and quiet sacrifices, belonged to all of us equally. I was wrong about almost everything. My name doesn't matter as much as what I stood for back then. I was the younger brother, the quieter one, the man who stayed late to balance accounts, instead of slamming doors and shouting demands. While my older brother, Evan, learned how to dominate rooms, I learned how to listen. While he learned how to take, I learned how to build. Our family business wasn't glamorous. It was steady, profitable, clean. A logistics company that moved medical equipment across 3 states. My parents trusted Evan with the front-facing power, clients, contracts, negotiations. They trusted me with the numbers, the systems, the parts no one ever praised but everyone depended on. And for years it worked. Or at least, that's what I thought. Evan always called me soft. He said it with a grin, like it was a joke, at family dinners, in meetings, in front of employees. Relax, he'd laugh. That's just how he is, too honest for his own good. I smiled along because I believed humility was strength, because I believed patience paid off, because I believed that doing the right thing quietly would eventually matter. What I didn't understand was that while I was protecting the foundation, Evan was digging underneath it. Looking back, there were signs. Small discrepancies in reports, transfers that didn't quite line up, contracts routed through shell vendors I didn't recognize. Every time I raised a question, Evan brushed it off with confidence that made me doubt myself. "You worry too much," he'd say. "Trust me, I've got this." And I did trust him, because he was my brother. Because my parents trusted him, because admitting otherwise would mean accepting something darker, that the person closest to me might be calculating my downfall. At night, I used to sit alone in the office after everyone left, staring at spreadsheets that felt heavier than they should have. Numbers don't lie. People do, and the numbers were starting to whisper. I told myself I was paranoid. That stress was messing with my head. That family doesn't steal from family. That belief kept me blind far longer than it should have. What I didn't know then was that the business I was protecting was already bleeding. That too, 3 million had already begun slipping through cracks carved deliberately, and that my silence, my patience, my so-called strength was exactly what Evan was counting on. The truth is, weakness isn't being quiet. Weakness is assuming love will protect you from betrayal. The truth didn't explode into my life. It crept in quietly, like a virus that waits until you're already weak. It started with a phone call from our bank's compliance officer, a woman I'd never spoken to before, using a tone that was too careful, too rehearsed. "Sir," she said, "we need clarification on a series of international transfers authorized under your company's executive signature." I remember gripping the edge of my desk. "Which executive?" I asked, even though I already knew. She said Evan's name. What followed was 30 minutes of numbers that didn't make sense unless you accepted one impossible truth. Someone inside our business had been siphoning money out for years. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, 2,000, 3 million. I felt cold, like my body had forgotten how to circulate blood. When I confronted Evan that night, he didn't deny it. That was the part that broke something inside me permanently. We were alone in the office. Lights off except for his corner suite. He leaned back in his chair while I stood there like a witness waiting to be sworn in. "You weren't supposed to find out yet," he said calmly. Yet, I asked him why. Not how, not how much, just why. He smiled, actually smiled, and said the words that still echo in my head. "You're too weak to run something this big. Someone had to take control." He told me he'd moved the money through layered accounts, offshore entities, and temporary holding structures. He called it strategy. He said our parents would never understand, that I was too sentimental to see the bigger picture. Then came the worst part. He told me he'd already positioned himself legally. Power of attorney documents, rewritten partnership clauses, a slow manipulation of our parents' trust while I was busy, being responsible. "They listened to me," he said. "They always have." I went home shaking. Tried to tell my parents the next morning. They didn't believe me. My father looked tired. My mother looked hurt. Evan looked disappointed at me. "Why are you trying to tear your brother down?" my mother asked. That question hurt more than the theft. Within a week, I was quietly removed from financial oversight until things cooled down. Evan framed it as concern for my mental health. He told people I was stressed, paranoid, unstable. And just like that, I went from trusted partner to liability. The final blow came when the company lawyer, our lawyer, sent me a notice stating my operational authority was suspended pending review. Even had outplayed me. I sat in my car that night, staring at the building I helped build, realizing something terrifying: justice doesn't belong to the honest. It belongs to the prepared. He stole our family's future, destroyed my credibility, and smiled while doing it. But as devastating as that moment was, it also did something unexpected. It stripped away my illusions. Losing the business hurt. Losing my parents' trust hurt worse. But what nearly broke me was losing my sense of who I was. For weeks after Evan pushed me out, I drifted through my days like a ghost haunting his own life. I'd wake up early out of habit, sit at the kitchen table with cold coffee, and stare at nothing. The silence was loud, too loud. My mind replayed every conversation, every moment I'd chosen restraint over confrontation. Was I really weak, or had I just been naive enough to believe kindness would protect me? At night, the anger came in waves. Not explosive rage, something colder, sharper, the kind that tightens your chest and refuses to let you sleep. I imagined storming into the office, exposing everything, forcing the truth into daylight. But every version of that fantasy ended the same way: Evan calm, confident, and legally insulated. Me looking desperate, unstable, exactly how he'd painted me. That realization terrified me, because it meant brute honesty wouldn't save me. I avoided my parents. Not because I didn't love them, but because I couldn't survive the disappointment in their eyes. They'd built their lives on the idea that their sons would protect what they created. One had betrayed them. The other had failed to stop it, or so it felt. I questioned myself constantly. Maybe I had missed something obvious. Maybe my caution wasn't wisdom, but fear wearing a respectable mask. Evan had always said winners take risks. I'd always said risks should be measured. Now I was paying the price for being measured. One evening, while sorting through old files I'd saved to a personal drive, copies I'd kept out of routine more than suspicion, I noticed something strange. A pattern I'd overlooked before. Small inconsistencies in timestamps. Approval chains that didn't quite line up. I felt something stir for the first time in weeks. Not hope, clarity. Avon hadn't just stolen money. He'd rushed. He'd assumed my silence meant blindness. He'd underestimated the same trait he mocked, my patience. Still, doubt crept in. If I went after him and failed, I'd lose what little credibility I had left. I could damage my parents permanently. I could become the villain in their story. And that was the hardest part. Revenge wasn't just about hurting Evan. It risked hurting everyone else too. I wrestled with that for days. Morality isn't simple when injustice wears a familiar face. I didn't want to destroy my family. I wanted the truth to matter again. That's when I understood something uncomfortable. Doing nothing wasn't neutral. It was choosing Evan's version of reality over the truth. The question wasn't whether I'd act. It was how. Quietly, legally, or patiently enough that when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't sound like an accusation, but a fact no one could deny. I closed my laptop that night with a decision settling heavily in my chest. I wouldn't confront Evan. I would outgrow him. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with discipline. Once I accepted that emotion would only make me sloppy, everything shifted. I stopped talking about Evan entirely. To my parents, to former coworkers, even to myself. Silence became my camouflage. If he was watching, and I knew he was, there would be nothing to see. On the surface, I looked defeated. I took a consulting job with a mid-sized auditing firm in another state. Boring title. Lower pay. Exactly the kind of move Evan would dismiss as proof that he'd been right about me all along. What he didn't understand was that I'd just given myself access to something priceless: perspective. By day, I worked clean cases, compliance reviews, internal controls, forensic accounting for companies that suspected internal fraud but didn't yet have proof. By night, I studied Evan. Not emotionally, strategically. I rebuilt the company's financial ecosystem from memory. Every vendor, every approval threshold, every shortcut Evan liked to take because he believed rules were for people without confidence. I cross-referenced that with the files I'd saved, backups he didn't know existed because he'd never thought I'd need protection from him. Patterns emerged quickly once I knew where to look. Shell vendors tied to the same mailing address. Consulting fees approved just under thresholds that triggered board review. International transfers routed through jurisdictions designed to confuse, not hide, classic overconfidence. Avon hadn't been careful. He'd been arrogant. Still, I didn't move. Evidence without timing is just noise. I needed leverage, not accusations. So I waited. I watched him expand: new office, new car, louder confidence. I listened when old coworkers called me late at night, unsure whether they should trust what they were seeing. I told them nothing. I just listened. Every detail they shared went into a quiet mental archive. The hardest part was my parents. They'd aged in months. Stress does that. I could see it in their posture, the way my father hesitated before signing documents now. Even had promised them relief, freedom from responsibility. Instead, he'd given them anxiety wrapped in reassurance. I wanted to tell them everything, but truth delivered too early can sound like bitterness. So I prepared instead. I consulted anonymously with an attorney who specialized in fiduciary fraud, then another who dealt with elder financial abuse. I didn't use Evan's name. I described a hypothetical brother, a hypothetical company. Each time the reaction was the same. If you can prove intent, one lawyer said, this isn't just civil, it's criminal. Intent, that was the key. Money moving isn't a crime by itself. Manipulation is. I started documenting timelines, correlating financial moves with conversations, emails, and changes in corporate control. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building a case for inevitability. And somewhere along the way, I noticed something unsettling. Evan had begun cutting corners faster. Bigger risks, less patience. Success hadn't made him smarter. It had made him sloppy. I closed my notebook one night, heart steady, mind clear. This wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about restoring balance quietly, completely, and in a way he'd never see coming. The first move wasn't dramatic. That was the point. Revenge that announces itself gives the enemy time to adapt. I needed Evan comfortable, confident enough to keep making mistakes. So I didn't expose him. I nudged him. From my consulting job, I recommended a third-party audit firm to one of Evan's major clients. Not directly, of course. I framed it as industry best practice during a casual call with their CFO, someone I'd built quiet credibility with over the years. The firm I suggested was meticulous, relentless, and most importantly, independent. Within weeks, that client began asking Evan questions. Nothing accusatory, just clarifications, requests for documentation, audit trails. Even called me for the first time in nearly a year. Have you been talking about me? He asked, trying to sound amused. No, I said honestly. Why? He laughed it off, but I heard the tension underneath. He wasn't used to being questioned. Not like this. That was my opening. Next, I contacted a vendor Evan had created, a shell company he used to funnel funds through inflated invoices. I didn't accuse them of anything. I asked about a clerical inconsistency in their filings. Then another. I seed their accountant each time. Paper trails don't like attention. Within a month, the vendor dissolved itself. Too risky, they said. Too many questions. Evan had to reroute money fast, and rush changes leave fingerprints. Meanwhile, I did something harder. I re-entered my parents' lives, not with accusations, but with support. I helped my father organize medical paperwork. I drove my mother to appointments. I listened when they complained about how stressed Evan seemed lately. I said nothing, but I noticed everything. Evan had begun pressuring them to sign updated estate documents. He framed it as protection, efficiency, simplification. My parents hesitated, something they hadn't done before. That hesitation mattered. I arranged for them to meet a financial advisor I trusted. Again, no accusations, just a second opinion. An outsider's calm questions landed differently than my warnings ever could. One afternoon, my mother called me, voice shaking. He gets angry when we ask questions now, she said. That's new. I closed my eyes. The mask was slipping. The final early move was the simplest. I submitted an anonymous tip to a regulatory body, not naming Evan, just outlining a pattern of behavior common in fiduciary fraud, complete with transaction structures that mirrored his. Regulators don't rush, but they don't forget either. By the time Evan realized something was wrong, he was surrounded by quiet scrutiny, from clients, vendors, advisors, and systems he'd assumed were asleep. He still thought he was in control. That was the beauty of it. I wasn't attacking him. I was removing the illusion that he was untouchable. And once that illusion cracks, everything built on it starts to shake. Evan didn't confront me because he suspected the truth. He confronted me because he was scared. It happened on a Friday night, the kind that used to mean celebration for him. I was leaving my temporary apartment when my phone rang. His name lit up the screen like a warning sign. "Meet me," he said. No greeting, no fake warmth.
"Office."
Now, when I walked into the building, I felt it immediately, the tension. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes. The hallway lights were half off. Evan's office door was open, and he was standing instead of sitting. That alone told me everything. "You've been busy," he said. I didn't answer. He started pacing, running a hand through his hair. "Clients are asking questions. Vendors are pulling out. Advisors are suddenly cautious." He stopped in front of me. "And you just happened to be back in town." There it was, not proof, just instinct, the same instinct he'd ignored when it mattered. "You always did this," he continued. "You never fought directly, you just waited, like a snake." I almost laughed. Almost.
"You stole from Mom, Dad," I said quietly.
"And you called me weak." His face hardened. I took what I deserved. That sentence was the turning point. I slid a folder across his desk. Not the full case, just enough. Transaction timelines. Vendor overlaps. Email metadata. Patterns that couldn't be unseen. His confidence didn't collapse all at once. It fractured. "You don't have everything," he said. "No," I agreed. "I have enough." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you go public with this, you burn the family. You burn yourself." That was the moment I'd prepared for. "I'm not going public," I said. "You already are?" I told him about the audits, the advisors, the regulators circling quietly. I told him that every move he made from now on would be watched, and that the faster he moved, the worse it would look. For the first time in his life, Evan wasn't the smartest person in the room. He sat down heavily. "What do you want?" I thought of my parents' tired faces, of the business built on trust, of the years I'd spent believing restraint meant weakness. "I want the money returned," I said. "Every dollar. I want control restored. And I want you gone from the company, from the accounts, from their influence." He stared at me, hatred and fear wrestling behind his eyes. "And if I say no," I met his gaze. "Then the truth finishes what I started." He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. "You planned this?" "Yes," I said. "Because you forced me to." That night, Evan didn't lose everything. He lost control. And for someone like him, that was the beginning of the end. Evan agreed to my terms 3 days later. Not because he'd grown a conscience, but because the walls had finally closed in. The money came back first. Quiet transfers, carefully structured to look like internal corrections. Watching those balances return felt surreal, like seeing blowback into a limb everyone assumed was dead, too. 3 million doesn't move silently, no matter how hard you try. People noticed. Questions multiplied. Then came the resignations. Evan stepped down as CEO, citing health and personal reasons. The board accepted it with rehearsed sympathy. They didn't know the full truth yet, but they knew enough to want distance. Power abandons you faster than loyalty ever does. My parents were the hardest part. I sat with them at the dining table where everything had started. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I showed them documents, timelines, the same quiet facts Evan had underestimated. My mother cried without making a sound. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. "He told us you were unstable," my father said.
"I know,"
I replied. That was all I said. I let the truth speak for itself. They didn't forgive Evan that night. They didn't condemn him either. Grief lives in that space between. The grief of realizing you raised someone capable of betrayal. The investigation didn't end with Evan's resignation. Regulators moved forward, slowly, methodically. What he'd returned didn't erase what he'd done. It only reduced the damage. Civil penalties followed. Professional blacklists. His name stopped opening doors. He didn't go to prison. But he lost what mattered to him most, credibility. And then there was me. I was offered my old role back. Same title. Same authority. I declined. Instead, I accepted a restructured position. Oversight without exposure. Control without spotlight. The company stabilized. New leadership took over. Stronger systems replaced trust-based shortcuts. The business survived. Our family changed. Evan and I no longer speak. Not out of anger, but clarity. Some bonds don't break, they rot. And cutting them is an act of preservation. People ask me if it was worth it. If revenge healed anything, the answer is complicated. Justice restored balance. It didn't restore innocence. I still think about the brother I believed I had. I still miss the version of my parents who slept easily. Some losses don't show up on balance sheets, but I sleep now. That counts for something. I used to think revenge meant watching someone fall. I was wrong. Real revenge is watching the world keep moving, without the person who tried to control it. Months after everything settled, I stood alone in the old warehouse where my father had signed the company's very first contract. Dust hung in the air. The place smelled like oil and history. This was where trust had built something real, and where arrogance had almost destroyed it. The business no longer needed me. That was intentional. Strong systems replaced personalities. Transparency replaced bravado. I'd helped design it that way before stepping back completely. Control without dependency, that was the lesson Even never learned. My parents healed slowly. Trust doesn't snap back like a rubber band. It regrows like bone, thicker where it once broke. They stopped asking about Evan, not out of cruelty but acceptance. Some names become too heavy to carry forward. As for Evan, I heard things, always secondhand. Consulting gigs that didn't last, invitations that never came, rooms that went quiet when he entered them. He still had money, still had charm, but no one handed him power anymore, and that was enough. People expect some final confrontation, a dramatic last word, closure wrapped in anger or forgiveness. There wasn't one. The last time I saw him was in a courthouse hallway, months after the penalties were finalized. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, an apology, an accusation, maybe both. I nodded once and kept walking. Because closure doesn't come from winning. It comes from no longer needing to. I don't think of myself as strong now, or weak. Those labels belong to people who still need to prove something. What I am is aware that betrayal doesn't always announce itself. That silence can be strategic. That patience, when paired with clarity, is terrifyingly effective. Most of all, I learned this. You don't destroy someone by becoming their opposite. You do it by becoming immune to them. Final moral revenge that costs you your values isn't justice, it's surrender. The only victory that lasts is the one that leaves you whole.